Well, it looks like one way or the other, we're about to get a bunch of PlayStation 5 information, whether Sony wants to tell us about it or people just want to leak it online, because now we're getting a bunch of images, video, and some numbers even around the PlayStation 5 with the UI and that SSD that's inside of the system. Remember, it's 825 gigabytes. That's what it's advertised as. But as I'm sure most of you know, especially after you looked at how much space you had available to you when you turned on your Xbox One X or your PlayStation 4 Pro that was supposed to have a terabyte, all of a sudden you're left with like over 100 gigabytes less than it's advertised. So it looks like now we have an idea as to how much will be available to us on that PlayStation 5 of that 825 gigabytes where we can install our games. Guys, enjoy this video. Make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if brand new here, hit that red subscribe button down below for the Spawn Wave Plus channel to keep up to date on all of the different game consoles, next-gen news, and everything else going on. So we're going to go over here to what I will say are fairly sketchy looking images, okay? Because I saw these. People were sending them to me like crazy to take a look at, and it's the typical thing. It's off screen. The screen looks kind of messy, dusty, right? And there's even a mouse pointer on the screen. Well, the story is these are images that were sent to them, and then they were taking a picture of that screen. And there was even some backstory. Apparently, they were trying to sell them or something, the images, maybe to a website that wants to try to run the story. I don't know. That whole thing's strange. But we do have at least an image of the amount of space that would be available. You can see that here. According to this, it's 664 gigabytes. Now, the text on screen appears to be in Russian, and I'm not 100% sure if that is just the system itself, like the language setting, or if they were using like the phone app for Google Translate as an example, where you kind of take a picture of the screen and can change the text and see what everything says. People are even arguing about that, if it is like a Russian dev kit, for example, right? Because, of course, people are trying to track down where this could have come from, and that makes sense. Everyone's trying to figure out as much as they can about the PlayStation 5, because on top of this, images of the UI and even a video of them starting the system up, the PlayStation 5, came out online, and they're using like a black DualSense controller, which is very similar to the one that we saw, of course, when they were doing like the FCC certifications and all this stuff. They had pictures of a black DualSense controller, and I figured that was for like a prototype or a dev kit. So there is a lot of stuff maybe pointing to that this could be a development kit that's being used, and who knows if that same allotment of space would have been used up, because according to this, that means that a little over 100 gigabytes would have been used for the OS itself, leaving us with a 664. Keep in mind, the Xbox Series X has just over 800 gigabytes, so there is a fair amount of difference there. 140 gigabyte difference. That could be 2 full games, as we've seen with something like Spider-Man Miles Morales, over 100 gigabytes with the Spider-Man Remastered as part of it. Demon's Souls, around 60 or so, and then maybe there's a patch on top of that. So 140 gigabytes isn't like a small amount for these systems, especially since they are SSDs or NVMe solid-state drives. They get kind of costly per gigabyte compared to like your standard 5400 RPM hard drive that was in the base PS4 and the Xbox One when those launched in 2013. But I guess you could say, technically, both systems here have more space than they did when they launched as like a PS4 and an Xbox One in the previous generation. So I guess we've moved up at least a little bit here, not like a crazy amount, but it's not as bad, I guess, as it was then. But then I also come back and I wonder, okay, if we're talking about like 100 plus gigabytes off of that advertised amount, I mean, with the Series X, it's 200 gigabytes basically knocked off. What's going to happen with that Series S that's a 512 gigabyte NVMe SSD? It really makes you wonder, now that we're seeing what the PlayStation 5 is going to have available to it. That Series S is going to be probably in the 300s maybe in terms of space available. And that, maybe 384 gigabytes, that's not going to go over well. Now, I think for the most part, on launch day, everyone will probably be fine with the PS5 with the space that it has there at 664, because realistically, most people will probably buy like Demon's Souls, right? That's the big one that most people are buying it for, or Spider-Man Miles Morales and maybe the remaster, and you'll be taking up 160 to 170 gigabytes at that time, and it'll really just start to pile up as we go through that first year and we get to more releases like Horizon, for example, where we're going to really start pushing more and more games onto that drive, and then all of a sudden we'll start to look at that NVMe drive. So that is really one of the big focuses here that I'd like, is if Sony would really talk about how we are going to add storage to this thing outside of a USB hard drive, of course, because most of us already know that. We get an external USB 3 or 3.1 and we plug it in and we can move games back and forth as we need to. But I'm very curious about that NVMe slot and how easy it is to access and install for like, we'll say mainstream or like regular people who aren't as plugged in, where, you know, we'll just rip a console apart here for fun. Is it as easy as taking the side panel off? Because one of the other images did show the side panel kind of off on its own. And while I didn't think they would go that far, you know what? Maybe the side panel really does come off, like it kind of slides up and then off, and then there's a slot somewhere there for you to pop your NVMe in. That would give it enough space, at least if you needed one that was fairly large, and it would kind of make sense if how Mark Cerny was talking about a heatsink on top. Maybe what he meant was if you have one that's too tall in terms of the heatsink, it would run into that side panel that you're trying to close. Because then we end up going into a whole thing where user error could end up with the system overheating and having issues that way. So I still am not 100% sure if that side panel will come off, despite them showing a picture of it kind of off on its own. But it is something still to think about. But 664 gigabytes. Let me know if that is enough space, because I feel like most people are going to look at that and say, well, Call of Duty Warzone is like 100-something gigabytes and it keeps getting bigger. So am I going to end up with like 6 games on this thing before I have to start thinking about putting an NVMe drive in there? Or am I going to get to the point where I just have to keep a hard drive plugged in and I'll just transfer back and forth? Still a lot of information we need. So I'm hoping that Sony really gets on the ball here and starts explaining things to us relatively soon. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Make sure you like the video on the way out if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if not. Guys, I will see you next time.